And thank you for joining us. I'm James Just. In the middle is John Cameron. On the other end is Richard Fields. Gentlemen, we are running down to the final week or so of the election. Oh, actually, by the time
Man, I got to vote.
audience sees this, it'll be like 4 days, 4 or 5 days. So why are both the Democrats and Republicans beholden to the military-industrial complex and everything that's kind of attached to it?
Actually, Libertarian candidate Joe Jorgensen has an article just published that really does an excellent job of explaining why both Democrats and Republicans are beholden to the military-industrial complex. And it boils down to something very simple. The military-industrial complex donates significant, huge amounts of money to both Republicans and center-left Democrats. So if you want to get the support of the huge campaign donations that come from the military-industrial behemoths, you have to toe the line, and you can't do anything that will end their pipeline to never-ending sales and profits. It's really that simple. And if you can take a look at the candidates who have not received mainstream press, mainstream establishment backing, look no further than Tulsi Gabbard, who was the only anti-war Democrat on the stage during the Democratic primaries and was shunned. Look no farther than Ron Paul, who was the only anti-war candidate on the stage during 2008 and 2012 primary debates, and he was lambasted by the press and by the establishment. He had, he got no traction at all in the mainstream.
Yeah, I think one of the things I didn't think about an article is good when it makes you think and gives you information, and it mentioned a number which I feel is kind of small, is $29 million in political contributions to Canada, but that pales in comparison to the blackmail over pulling a base, from your state. Like, California was a net recipient of way more than, the money that was taken out by the Fed back when they were in the fold. And then when California went Republican, elected some Republican senators, and the makeup of the Congress changed, you had federal money fleeing. I don't know what it's like now, but threatening to close a military base with like 30,000 jobs. For example, here in Sacramento, we've lost like 50,000 military jobs over the last 20 years or so with base closures. And then you have the plants in Southern California, which are almost no longer there. They're in other places around the country producing these weapons of war. And you have the shipyards, and you have, all of that stuff, the hospitals that take care of the vets, and all the businesses that depend on them. And, that number's thrown around a lot about, why it's important to keep that money spent. But I think the numbers show pretty squarely that if you leave the taxpayer with the tax money in their pocket to spend as they see fit, the multiplier effect is way more. And one thing the article didn't mention, and maybe it did, and I didn't read it well enough, is that there's this constant interchange between, government SACs. People from government SACs go into government, and they're in these treasury positions, and they're in advisory roles, and they're on panels, and they're on think tanks, and back and forth and back and forth. And they're all self-serving. It's like the committee that hands out the Nobel Prizes and the Rhodes Scholarship and everything else. They're controlled by people who have a vested interest of keeping the ball rolling in the same direction. And my last thing, and then I promise I'll stop, is that the fallout of us going into places and waging war is pretty bad. But then there's that fallout. But then the fallout of us leaving, leaving Afghanistan. I'm not saying we should stay. I just feel sorry for the thousands of people who are going to be beheaded, and some already are, who were stupid enough to cast their lot with Americans, trying to fight, medieval murdering savages. thinking that, we would see the fight out, and now we're leaving and they're all going to die. So it's a mess. And I'm glad that we have two rather significant geographic barriers. Well, four if you count Mexico and Canada, to people invading us. And I think maybe it's time for us just to stop spending that money elsewhere and give it back to the taxpayer to spend, so that we have a booming world again.
Yeah, I mean, the add-on point to what you were making, as far as spending money in every congressional district, the defense companies, the Lockheeds and the Grummans and the Raytheons and so on, have been extremely clever in making sure that every congressional district in the country, almost without exception, has some sort of a military base, making the representative in that particular district beholden to keeping the warfare spending going, because otherwise, hey, they'll lose the base, and you don't want that to happen. And of course, if it did happen, we look at Mather, we look at McClellan just here in Sacramento, and see that those bases have been put to much more productive use than was the case when they were military bases.
Now, and Mather is because of some skullduggery with the controlling interests out at Sacramento Municipal. Is it called Sacramento International still? I guess it is. Airport. Mather would be a much better hub to fly people out of, and it's got some huge runways because it used to touch and goes B-52s there, and and great hangars and all the rest of that. But it's prevented by some backroom dealing from having any passenger service flying in and out of there. It's only cargo. So, the fallout when you let these clowns control things and instead of letting the market control them is pretty significant. And then you have another airfield at McClellan that's huge, and so lots of benefit to turning those fully loose as centers for commerce and travel than keeping them to the side.
Yeah, I mean, we see Dallas, Chicago, all of these large cities have more than one airport competing with each other. There's no reason why we can't have something competing with Sacramento International Airport, particularly considering that it's a half an hour to an hour away from most parts of Sacramento, and McClellan and Mather are right next door. Sort of like Love versus DFW.
Yeah, it's not like we don't have other cities. LAX is right in the center of LA. It's not like airports in the middle of cities are a strange thing. And the industrial complex, it's actually bigger than most people think. These military industrial complexes, or all the various industrial complexes that are attached to the government spending, whether it's homeless industrial complex, the educational industrial complex.
That's the big one. That's the one I wanted somebody to touch on. I'm glad you touched on it. It's crazy how much skullduggery goes on there, and how many fat salaries are created. 18% annual growth in administrative costs in universities in California. Layer upon layer upon layer of people inventing jobs and getting paid for doing so. And
let's not forget about the medical industrial complex, which is fully responsible for raising the cost of healthcare from 4% of GDP prior to Medicare, Medicaid, and all the rest to 18% now. It's when you have one buyer, Medicare for all would be the absolute worst possible thing as far as the cost of healthcare. When you have one buyer, that buyer is going to be paying a lot more money. Yeah. Particularly if the government is the one buyer.
No, wait a second. Government is great. I hear they got some great deals on hammers and toilet seats. I think they got a hammer for only like $4,200 and a toilet seat for I think $11,000. I mean, you can't get that kind of. Oh yeah, you can. Never mind.
We're talking about government corruption. We're going to kind of move on here. The Inquisitor actually ran a story that the Hunter Biden story is failing to land, and they're answering is why it's kind of not landing the same reason the Trump tapes didn't land 4 years ago. Is kind of everybody expects it, nobody cares. But it's hard for a story to land if the media is not covering it and social media is kind of silencing it, essentially.
Yeah, you'd think. Actually, I think the fact that the social media and the mainstream media either belittled or ignored the New York Post story has actually given the story more legs than it would have had otherwise. Mm-hmm. I think what's really going on is that the body politic has become so tribal, so either gung-ho MAGA red or gung-ho never Trump blue, that anything that detracts from that tribal storyline is simply ignored by the partisans on either side.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the difference between the media focus on the Steele dossier, which we're now finding was basically created by Hillary Trump. She went out looking for somebody to create.
Hillary Clinton, you mean?
Yeah, Hillary Clinton. Sorry, they're all the same. See, and that's what you really want to upset one of these Republicrats is talk to them about how their policies are exactly the same, except for on one or two issues that only 2% of the electorate cares about. And they get incensed because you talked about tribalism. You know, it's reminds me of that Star Trek story where there was hatred between these two races, and they both had like one half of their face white and one half of their face black. It's just they were on the other side, and so you know, we got that going on, and you know, we talk about it on the show over and over again. If you get people afraid and upset, they're pretty easy to manipulate. You know, when people are emotionally removed from things, they start actually turning on their thinking brain, which they're not doing now.
No, it's everything's so tied up in emotion. It's vote blue, vote blue no matter who, and then you've got the Trump guys who are, you know, Trump is like some messiah for them at the moment, and it's almost this religious fervor, and anything that's not for me is heresy. It's
well, and there's a good reason for that. When you politicize decision making, you move away from win-win solutions. If you or I decide to, you know, if I want to go to work for you, John, and you want to pay me 5 cents an hour, and I agree to 5 cents an hour, that's a win-win situation for both of us because I'm willingly doing it. But if the government says, no, you can't work for anything less than $15 an hour, and you think I'm not worth $15 an hour, which is eminently true, then you are forcing me into unemployment. And that's a win-lose.
You're worth at least 1501, Richard.
That's the difference between government, you know, political decision making and private sector decision making. Private sector is win-win. Both parties to an agreement agree to it and benefit from it. Political decision making is win-lose. One side is going to lose, and that's why elections become so-called most important election in history, because half the country is going to win or half the country is going to lose, depending on who gets elected. Yeah. It's you know, the overarching argument for making government not a part of most economic decisions and making government entirely smaller than it is, dealing only with matters of national security and police and courts and not much else.
Yeah. Well, I would say, go ahead, James.
A lot of people are talking to me about the toxic nature of politics. How come everything is political? And I says, well, the more responsibility you give government, the more things are political, because now they become, rather than an issue between people, they're an issue between the government, and that makes it politics. You can't have it both ways. You can't have a public policy and not have it be political. It's just, you can't do it. And so the more we get government involved, and the more fights we're going to have. It's just the nature of the beast. And so if you want a less political life, you have to have a less political life. There's literally no way around it.
Which means less government involved.
Well, so maybe the suggestion is, instead of red or blue, let's vote red, white, and blue. Jorgensen.
Yeah, or gold, as they put it.
Yeah, gold. That'll work.
All right, so we're going to move back on California power problems. The wind is blowing heavily outside my window this morning, and there's some of my friends that are sitting there without power because PG&E shutoffs to prevent fires, and yet we got the governor wanting to go to, all electric cars in 15 years, which is a bold goal to begin with. But when we can't even have enough power and the power isn't stable, I don't understand what they're trying to do. You're putting the cart before the horse.
Well, I think all electric. I still, Richard laughs at my. I've got to do some research on the number of installed solar panels, and then once I do, I'll throw down that gauntlet on the next show. But all these things that people want to do, like solar power, wind power, have a huge issue that they haven't figured out, and I don't know what they're going to back them up with unless they go nuke. If we want to end, gasoline power next week, I'm fine. But bury me a nice little nuclear power plant, within a stone's throw of my house, so I can charge my electric car, and I don't have to worry about waiting for the sun to shine or the wind to blow to run the batteries up. So. And the market needs to make those decisions, because when, the reason nuclear power isn't something you can carry around in your pocket, and it could be, is because government got involved and assumed the liability for all these nuclear power plants way earlier than they should have gone online, and then over-regulated them so that they could make no improvements in them. And so, the idea that some lunatic who's elected without, to my knowledge, any kind of scientific education whatsoever is going to decide to turn the infrastructure and billions of dollars and millions of jobs upside down on a whim is insane. But the idea, we have in England, I read a BBC little sidebar, and they were talking about power as the hurricane hits. One of our mini hurricanes hit Louisiana or something. They were commenting on the fact that 4 million people were without electricity, and they said, well, that's because in the U.S. they string electrical cables up on poles above ground, like you would put out so much laundry to dry. So in other places, when the wind blows, they don't care, because the electrical power is all being carried for the most part and underground cables. So, there are solutions to all of this stuff, and having the government get out of it is the best thing. Yeah.
I think the best thing to do is to draw an analogy between the nuclear power industry and the software, hardware, the internet, the information age. The information age, the hardware, the software, all of the thought processes that went into creating the internet were, by and large, happened in a totally unregulated marketplace. And nuclear, on the other hand, was created by government in Los Alamos, and was never allowed to be created in an unregulated. It was regulated with an iron fist from day one. Mm-hmm. And it's the regulation that is causing is the reason why nuclear has not been allowed to progress and become safe and all pervasive, and its lack of regulation has allowed the information age, the internet, to become pervasive. The internet never would exist with the kind of regulation that the nuclear industry had to withstand. There are nuclear technologies available today that are both safe, totally safe, and feasible. You can bet that regulation won't let them get a foothold anytime soon, because there are interests, oil and gas interests, solar interests, wind interests, all kinds of lobbying forces that will want to keep a cap on any kind of competition, and that is competition that creates the incentive and the ability for various kinds of energy to become viable, particularly in this case nuclear. And the other thing that we're looking at with the winds is that we're looking at, we've talked about this before, we're looking at a huge amount of fuel on the forest floor that is sitting there having accumulated for centuries. Well, not centuries, for the last 50 to 100 years, so almost a century. Yeah. To be lit by sparks from these above ground power lines.
And then I want to add something to that, and then I want to talk about what you just said, Richard, the fuel thing. I tried to do an internet search, not a Google Scholar search, but a standard Google search for the relationship between fuel on the ground and the intensity and duration and size of fires. And what came up first was, when I did the searching in Google, was the one paper out there that debunked the importance of fuel in creating all these fires. The one paper that said that the amount of fuel, I mean, you throw a match on the floor and there's just my tile floor there, not going to burn. It'll burn itself out. Throw some gasoline on it, I'm going to have something I got to deal with. But the one paper that came up when I did the Google search was the one that said that fuel didn't have any importance. And this is going to be hugely important in this election when all of these social media platforms and everything are controlling the news cycle. I mean,
well, and they're in effect controlled by government because they have to kowtow, or they will come under the regulatory burden that nuclear has faced for the, ever since World War II.
Yeah. Well, I have to remind everybody that Facebook's latest change was done to stay in compliance with law. Their changes that they're doing are to remain in compliance. So,
or to avert further legislation or regulation that will make their life even more difficult. I mean, we like to say, or I like to say that Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of the media platforms are, operating as private enterprises and should be allowed to censor however much they want. But the problem with that is that they are being forced to censor by the threat of regulation and/or regulation primarily, or more
lawsuits.
invasive laws.
To lawsuits, they're also open to lawsuits. They're avoiding the potential lawsuits. That's basically from California, and I think from Germany. They're getting a bunch of pushback from California, I believe Germany, and so they just said, "Well, the hell with it." They're not even after the election. They're just going to stop taking ads for social and political causes. So if you're a
likely story, they'll take ads for, I would say, the Man Boy Love Association if the pay was good enough, but they probably wouldn't do that because they'd get in trouble. But anything up to that, they'll take the money.
Well, they won't take money from me after November 3rd.
No.
As a political candidate, they won't take money from me after November 3rd.
Well, after November 3rd, you won't have to worry about it because you're going to get elected. So,
Well, we can hope about that. All right. So before we go, the media is finally noticing Cal exit. I finally saw an article in the Sacramento Bee.
And the Bee of all places.
In the Bee of all places that is talking about all these people leaving California. And they actually did a somewhat decent job about telling why. I mean, of course, they kind of blew the analysis, but at least the base reasons that, the politics is kind of gone wonky. It's impossible to live here in expense. And so people are just leaving. If you wanted to raise a family, people are just leaving.
Yeah, John and I have personal experience with that. We used to raise money for a libertarian/conservative public interest outfit. And the people that we talked to, the donors to this libertarian/conservative outfit, would very frequently tell me, "Hey, I'm on my way out of town. I'm moving to," I had one guy who owned a fencing company in Southern California say, "I'm moving to," in his case, Wyoming, just as soon as I can get out of here, as soon as I can sell my house. I had another guy say, "I'm very seriously looking at moving my manufacturing plant from Los Angeles to wherever." And people are not only talking about it, they're actually doing it. And so we're looking at conservatives who don't want to be belittled by being Trump supporters or whatever, or libertarians who feel totally lost in the wilderness, or anybody that doesn't follow the green, progressive, Democratic Party line, being ostracized by their friends and neighbors. They're saying, "Hey, I don't have to put up with this. I can go to Utah, I can go to Wyoming, I can go to Idaho, I can go to Texas, and I'll feel right at home." The sad part about it for California is a lot of these people are the most productive and beneficial and tax producing people in the state. So not only is California losing people, losing to out-migration of people in general, but we're losing our best and brightest.
And then the unfortunate
keep the state viable.
Add something to that. Unfortunately, the people that are most negatively impacted are the ones that can't move. If you own a restaurant, if you own a farm, if you own timber, if you own vineyards, if you own the biggest single industry, here's your quiz for the day, folks. And there's no points if you don't get this right. What is the single highest revenue producing industry in the state of California?
Agriculture.
Agriculture. All right, everybody knows that. And what is the one business that is basically becoming more and more impossible to be in? Starving for water because of a fish that's not even native, and on and on and on and on. And, you know, I think last time I checked, oh, wait, my stomach is telling me I need food. So does the rest of California. So does the rest of the country.
Which reminds me, it's past lunchtime.
Yeah, well, so we should end the show. But you know, it's just, you know, the countries have done this, and I haven't seen a state do it to itself, a state in the United States of America, but California is killing itself. And
well, California, Illinois, and New York are all doing it to themselves.
Yeah. And if you look at on a national level, you can see Venezuela, largest oil reserves in the world. Norway. Is Norway the one that's got the huge pension fund? Yeah. Norway, way smaller oil reserves.
Well, they have oil reserves offshore, but
they have oil reserves offshore, but they're a fraction of what Venezuela is sitting on. Mm-hmm. You have hyperinflation, people rioting, no food in stores, no
gas at the pump.
No gas at the pump, having to bring oil and gas in
from Iran, of all places.
Iran. And in Norway, you have a $17 trillion or something like that pension fund for folks when they retire, paid for basically all out of oil and investments after that. What's the difference? Government, a capitalist, even though the people here try to say it's socialist, it is not. There's some hardcore capitalists in Norway, and proudly so, versus socialist. And that's a lesson to be learned. You know, bad government, or even good government, should be kept in a little tiny box and let out every once in a while just to do what's absolutely necessary, and then stuffed back in there so it can't do any damage.
And that's what we're going to end the show.
That's why I let my dog out to go pee once in a while.
Yeah. And that's it. We're going to end the show on that one. We're out of here. Go to libertariancounterpoint.com to find us, and you can find us on all the various podcast networks now, and on all various social media things. You guys know how to find us. Thank you for watching. And from all of us here at Libertarian Counterpoint, please remember to love everybody.
Oh, thank you very much for having